Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusril, the game is World of Warships, and this, at last, is my review of the premium German Tier 6 destroyer T-61. The Fraulein of Doom has been at the point of release for more than 6 months, but she's finally here, she's out of embargo, and she's on sale as of the 17th of August 2018. However, should you spend 25,000 doubloons in-game before midnight UTC on Friday the 10th of August 2018, she will be credited to your account free of charge, along with some other goodies. A word of warning here, that cutoff is Universal Coordinated Time. Double check the Wargaming website if you're interested in that offer and you have the doubloons to burn, and make sure of the cutoff for your time zone. 25,000 doubloons is a lot of cash, and I'd hate for people to spend that much and miss the freebie because of a time zone error. Also, please note that you have to spend the doubloons in-game. It's not just buy 25,000 doubloons. You can use doubloons that you already have saved up, or that you've got from other sources, or that you've gone out and bought. You just have to spend 25,000 in the relevant time period. Historically, T-61, well, technically she saw action exactly once. When the Netherlands fell in 1940, the Dutch shipyards were taken more or less intact, and the Kriegsmarine contracted with the Dutch shipbuilders for 12 boats. Officially, these were designated the Type 1940 Fleet torpedo boats, even if by most Navy standards they were actually mid-sized destroyers, and torpedo boat meant something completely different and much smaller. The Dutch workforce seems to have mustered up all the enthusiasm that you might expect of a workforce that's under the Nazi jackboot, and by 1944 exactly none of the boats were ready for combat. 8 to 12 of them had been laid down, it depends on which source you read. However, only 3 would ever be launched. T-61, T-63 and T-65 were all moved to the Baltic in late 1944, probably the yards at Kiel, for completion. T-63 and T-65 would be captured at Kiel and subsequently scuttled. T-61 didn't even make it that far. On the 12th of September 1944, she was torpedoed and sunk by Allied aircraft while under tow in the Baltic. In-game, however, T-61 is complete. She's in service as a Tier 6 premium destroyer, and frankly, she's just a little bit of a monster of a boat. As far as raw numbers go, she has 14,700 health. That's third best in the tier, with only the Gerda and the Igler beating her, although the Russian-designed Gnevny, along with her Pan-Asian cousins Fushun and Anshan, do run her very close. Artillery consists of the same 4 128mm L45 rifles available to the Gerda, in a very similar ABXY setup, superfiring on the B and X turrets. T-61's fire control is actually slightly better than Gerda's, caps out at a range of 11.6 kilometers with a maximum horizontal dispersion of 8.79 mils. Gerda caps out at 10.9 kilometers with a maximum horizontal dispersion of 8.89 mils, although that 0.1 of a mil, at most conditions that difference is so minor you're never going to notice it at all. Turret traverse is the same as Gerda's 128mm setup, 22.5 seconds to turn 180 degrees, 8 degrees per second as standard. That's usable, mostly. It's not great in a point-blank dogfight or if you get blindsided, but otherwise perfectly comfortable. T-61 also has very good firing arcs, most notably she can lay all 4 guns on a target that's 30 degrees off the bow. What isn't the same as Gerda, however, is the rate of fire. Gerda's 128mm rifle needs 5 seconds to reload out of the box. T-61's supposedly identical rifle reloads in 4 seconds flat. Put another way, while Gerda is ambling along at 47 rounds a minute and just over 70,000 high explosive damage in theory, T-61 is clocking 60 rounds and 90,000 damage. That's not the best in tier by a long shot. Igler gets a theoretical high explosive DPM of 120,000, Farragut B notches up 135,000, but T-61 has got much better mid to long range ballistics than either of those boats, having a muzzle velocity of 830 meters a second compared to the 700 odd on the trebuchets. Perhaps not quite as good as the Russian 130mm rifles, but her DPM isn't too far behind those either. It's her torpedo tubes, however, that probably got the most attention in the first test cycles all those months ago. T-61 carries the same G7 Steinbutt as the Geda, and she has the same pair of quad launchers. Nothing remarkable there. The Steinbutt is a very solid Tier 6 torpedo, does 65 knots out to 8 kilometers, has a detection range of 1.3 kilometers, a Brown alert time of about 7.4 seconds, and the warhead does up to 13,700 damage. However, Geda's launchers need 90 seconds to reload. T-61's crews have clearly been on the shock alert because they reload in 68 seconds, dropping to 61 seconds with torpedo armament expertise, and potentially going sub 1 minute if you have adrenaline rush and a few holes in the hull by way of motivation. That's actually the same as T-22's triple launchers, and when we first saw T-61 a lot of people thought that either there'd been a typo or that somebody had copied and pasted the stats off T-22's torpedo launcher and just forgotten to change the reload. Regardless of how it happened, if there was one thing a lot of testers thought was going to be nerfed on this ship, it was that torpedo reload time. It hasn't been nerfed. In fact, Wargaming are making a point of it in their articles promoting T-61. As a consequence of that reload, T-61 could put out 8 salvos in 10 minutes, and she's only 12 seconds shy of her 9th, as standard. That's 64 torpedoes in the water, and not very far behind the 72 torpedoes that Fubuki or Shinonome can manage in the same period. The Japanese torpedoes are 610mm, so they do pack a significantly bigger wallop, but they're also slower, easier to detect, and therefore easier to evade. T-61's torps are actually more likely to hit an unaware target. Moving on to stealth, T-61's surface detection caps out at 6.1 kilometers with concealment expert and camouflage. That's currently tied for 3rd best in the tier with Fubuki and Shinonome again. The only Tier 6 that can outspot T-61 are the Hatsuharu and the Gallant at the moment, although the still work-in-progress HMS Icarus will join Gallant at 2nd place with a 6.0 kilometer detection, if she isn't changed before launch. A potential weakness, however, is T-61's speed. She does 35 knots out of the box, and that's about as slow as is advisable for a mid to high tier destroyer. If you feel the need, then Sierra Mike takes you up to 36.8 knots. Plugging in an engine boost on top will give you a dash speed that's just shy of 40, which will keep you in front of the very angry cruiser that you just tried to torpedo. Her destroyer friends, particularly if they're Russian or Pan-Asian, however, will be considerably more of a problem. On a related topic, rudder shift is 3.6 seconds out of the box, turning circle is 600 meters. Not the best answer at Tier 6, that's the Americans, with the British and the Japanese not very far behind, but it's good enough. You'll dodge a lot of incoming fire if you can keep the range at 8 kilometers or more. Consumables are identical to Geda. She has the standard destroyer damage control and engine boost consumables, and she has the usual German flavours of nerfed smoke and hydroacoustic search with enhancements to back them up. The smoke, of course, only lasts 61 seconds. Smoking is bad, 9? However, the hydro runs for 92 seconds, will pick up ships at a hair under 4 kilometers, and torpedoes at 2.8 and change. The flak constitutes 4 quad 20mm guns, 2 dual 37mm guns, and harsh language, which is amazingly not the worst in the tier. In fact, it's pretty decent. The worst would be Shinonome with her single twin-linked 50 caliber machine gun emplacement, but I still can't recall shooting down a single plane in T-61. At all. Whether a difference that makes no difference is actually a difference is a question I'll leave to the philosophers. So, T-61's not the best destroyer in any category. She's not quite as good a torpedo boat as the Japanese, not quite as good as close-range Dakar as the Americans or French, not quite as good at long-range sniping as Gnevny and her Pan-Asian cousins, not quite as survivable as Geda, and she's one of the slowest destroyers in the tier. So why do I think she's firmly in the overpowered category on Little White Mouse's angry YouTuber scale? Well, the key word is not quite. Well, key phrase. She's not quite the best, typically coming in around 3rd place on virtually every measure for a destroyer in this game at Tier 6. She has almost the best torpedoes, almost the best artillery, almost the best artillery, almost the best stealth. But the ships that knock her down to that not quite, that almost, in a given category, will often have serious weak spots somewhere else, and T-61 doesn't really have a serious downside. Her only real weaknesses are her flak, like almost all the destroyers, her short duration German smoke, which you can work around, and her slightly slow 35 knot speed, which is usually perfectly adequate to task. It's very telling that the only times that I've felt even vaguely outmatched in T-61 when I've played her are when I've been facing tier 8s, or a determined air presence, or a third or half or more of the enemy team at once. We'll see how things play over the next few months as more people get her into battle, but I can definitely see T-61 ending up on the naughty step with the likes of Kamikaze, Belfast and Nikolai. So let's run the categories, shall we? Would I buy her for cooperative and operations? Very no. The AI is too good at dodging torpedoes, it tends to prioritise low health targets like destroyers, and scenarios tend to emphasise durability, so destroyers don't generally do very well in them anyway. Would I buy her for random battles and grinding? Yes. Her skill set lines up precisely with the German tech tree destroyers. The only potential hiccup are the Gerda and the Z-23 with their 150mm guns, but otherwise she is a near perfect match, and similarly to competitive gaming, her performance is so good that it tends to make grinding free XP and cash very, very comfortable. Would I buy her for competitive modes like Ranked or King of the Sea? Oh dear sweet RNGesus, yes, so much yes, all the yes! T-61 basically makes every other tier 6 destroyer at best a questionable choice, and at worst possibly outright obsolete, because she can do almost every job that normally goes to a destroyer, almost as well as the destroyers specialised for each job, except she can do them all, in the same game, and doesn't have to seriously compromise. About the only thing she doesn't have available to her is the defensive fire that Farragut and Monaghan have available, and most of the time you're going to leave air defence to the cruisers and possibly the carrier if you're not scouting. Remember, competitive carriers tend to be more concerned about intelligence and information war than they are about strike work. For a collector's point of view, however, well, mostly no. T-61 was never completed. She only saw action by virtue of being on the wrong end of an airstrike. However, she was the second, almost kinda nearly, perhaps if you squint a bit, Dutch boat in this game, so Dutch players might have an interest in her there. A final note before I sign off and you all rush off to either throw money at Wargaming or start picketing the forums and the Reddit. I'm not sure if Wargaming have intended this, but the last year has seen the power levels of mid-tier destroyers creep noticeably, at least for me. Between IFHE, the Pan-Asian lines, Haida, the British line that's coming up, and now T-61, we've got a lot of rapid-fire gunboats that also have fairly capable torpedoes and pretty reasonable stealth on top. The old distinction between the gunboat destroyers and the torpedo ninjas is getting very, very blurred. The consequence of this, of course, is that a number of the very specialised older destroyers, and I'm thinking mostly of the Japanese boats here, are on the wrong end of what looks like power creep. And Gerda also is in a problem situation here because T-61 is simply better than her on virtually every metric. The Japanese destroyers, of course, are so specialised into torpedoes that they've been suffering a lot of late with the proliferation of hydro and radar, and adding in T-61, a boat that can torpedo nearly as well as her Tier 6 counterparts Fubuki Shinonome, better arguably than Hatsuharu, and still play the gunboat role, and still manage almost as good a stealth setup, and bully caps with hydro? Yeah, I'm struggling to see what this leaves for Bucky and her sisters. What I'm hoping, of course, is that Wargaming are watching the telemetry and the stats on those ships very carefully. We'll see how things shake out over the next few months as things bed in, and Wargaming get the data and the statistical anomalies even themselves out, but I can't help but think that Fubuki and Shinonome, Hatsuharu in particular, and Gerda are probably going to be in need of a boost when the dust settles. However, we'll see how that plays. With that said, I am Yusril. That has been a look at the just about released T-61, and until next time, farewell.